All right, here we go, folks. Continuing on with dealing with assignment number 3, the issues-based analysis. Yes, I'm in a different room. I'm upstairs now because my kids are having lunch. So anyways, you have an example on the screen there, left side here, that shows us an issues-based assignment number 3, right? And the issue is, should voting in Canadian federal elections be made mandatory? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at how to handle and how to read what the citizens are saying and how to put it into our own words. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to type citizen number 1. And I would suspect that it would be wise for you to do this too, right? Open up a Word doc, get out a piece of paper, and just write citizen number 1 down, right? Or in a Word doc, type citizen number 1. Now it says, right, again, should federal election voting be made mandatory? So the issue, guys, is democratic participation. Oops. And let's try to break down what the different sides of the issue would be. So I would argue at its most basic, we have individualism. If I could spell, versus collectivism. And the individualist, when it comes to the issue of mandatory voting, would an individualist who believes in individual rights and freedoms actually believe in being forced to do something? No. So an individualist would believe that the government has no right to force people to do anything in so far as their actions do not harm anybody else. They believe that people have the right to choose how to live their lives, and they do not believe in people being told to do something against their will, right? What about a collectivist? What would a collectivist say about, if I could spell it, I'm sorry. What would a collectivist say about being forced to do something? Well, in this case, I mean, voting is a democratic requirement, or not requirement, but is a democratic responsibility. Apathy is a problem in a democracy. Ooh, I just thought of something. How democratic is a nation that forces people to participate in that democracy, right? Democracy is supposed to be about choice, and if you're forcing someone to do something, you're not giving them a choice. That's kind of ironic, right? Okay, anyways, going back to collectivists. Collectivist voting is a democratic responsibility. Apathy is a problem in democracy. It could be argued that high rates of voter turnout. If you remember from the democracy unit, right, I said that in general, only about 6 out of 10 Canadians participate in federal elections, which means that 4 out of 10 aren't. And we've actually had voter turnouts in the 50% or within the like 50 to 60% range, right? Like it was like 59 point something, which is kind of crazy. So anyways, it could be argued that high rates of voter turnout would be good for the collective of Canada, and then the people would most assuredly get the government they want through the democratic process. Okay, so that's really quickly, guys, just what, an individualist versus a collectivist, what they would say. Okay, now, with that, right, so I tried to frame the issue here as an individualist versus collectivist issue, and I would highly recommend that you do a bit of thinking before you actually do this assignment, right? You'll have an hour and a half to get it done, which is plenty of time to do 4 paragraphs. Do a bit of thinking. What would a person who's an individualist versus a collectivist say when it comes to being forced to vote in an election, right? When something's mandatory, you have to do it. Okay, and that's all I did here, right? An individualist would say this, a collectivist would say that. And all we're doing here, guys, is we're demonstrating that we understand the complexity of the issue. We're demonstrating we understand that there's 2 sides to it, okay? And chances are we're going to use this later anyways. Okay, citizen 1. So this guy says, voter turnout in Canadian federal elections seems to have settled in the range of 59 to 65% of the eligible population. What's wrong with this? Our society is based on individual rights, and if a citizen decides to exercise his or her right not to participate in the voting process, we should not interfere. So overall, guys, when you read that, is this person in favor of mandatory voting, or is he, citizen 1, against it? And the answer is they are against mandatory voting. All right, now let's go through this, right? What does he say? So voter turnout Canada seems to have settled. Okay, so voter turnout is still more than half of Canadians, and this is sufficient in his eyes, right? So we're just taking this first sentence right here, and we're putting it into our own words, right? What's wrong with this? This says our society is based on individual rights. So this guy's definitely an individualist. So he's focused on the, he's focused on the right of the individual to participate in elections, and also the right of individuals to not participate in elections. In a society where one has freedom, people should be free to vote or to not vote. Boom! So our society is based on individual rights, and if someone decides to exercise his or her right not to participate in the voting process, we should not interfere. So much like how people have the right to free speech and to free expression, the right to vote is also something that comes with the ability to not use that right in a particular manner, and it is not the job of government to tell us how to participate in this democracy. How's that? Pretty good? Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. So when I think about this guy basically saying government should stay out of our lives, right? I think someone like John Locke, right? So government should be small and protect our life, liberty, and property. and not be involved in dictating what we do with our lives. We could also throw in a little bit of J.S. Mill, right? John Stuart Mill, right? Harm principle. The action of not voting is bringing no physical harm to anybody. So as a result, it should not be something the government gets involved in. Okay, that's citizen 1. Okay, so seems like a pretty easy thing to go through, right? And I just added some ideas, right? Locke, John Stuart Mill, right? And then I just sort of expanded on what he was saying. Notice how I didn't just be like, citizen 1 thinks that voter turnout between 59 to 65% isn't a big deal. There's nothing wrong with this. Canadian society is based on rights of the individual, and if a person decides to not vote, the government should not interfere, right? That literally was just me taking it right out of this. So what I want you to do is take what they say and expand on it a little bit, right? Add to it based on your own understanding. Okay, now let's go citizen 2. So let's see what she says. So she says, having less than 2/3 of voters participate in federal elections is unacceptable. Communist. So our democracy requires active, responsible citizenship, and at the core of citizenship is voting in elections. Some countries have mandatory voting, and they consistently get a participation rate of 95%. Now, that's a vibrant democracy, she says. So this is your opposite of citizen number 1. This is what we're looking for. If he said no to mandatory elections, she, this statist, is saying yes, right? She's saying yes. So she is for mandatory voting. Not sure why I capitalized the M there. So she is for mandatory voting. And let's get some ideas down based on what she says. So having less than 2/3 of voters participate in federal elections is unacceptable. So we'll say the high level of voter apathy and the low turnout for Canadian federal elections is definitely an issue for the health of our democracy. Boom. Beautiful. Now, notice apathy, right? I got voter apathy in there. But Mr. Crosby, it doesn't say that in the prompts. That's okay. If you can use the knowledge that you gain from Social 30, right, things that we've talked about, and you can add it in there, then you do that. Why? Because when you can take those ideas and incorporate it into your writing, you demonstrate a higher level of understanding than a student who cannot. Okay, let's keep going here. So it says, our democracy requires active, responsible citizenship, and at the core of citizenship is voting. So democracy is a right, but with rights come responsibilities. And one of the most elemental democratic responsibilities fix that that comes with the right to democracy is the responsibility to actively participate in that democracy. Voter apathy is cancerous for a democracy, and the trend of low voter turnout in federal elections needs to be stopped. Boom. And then she talks about mandatory voting, right? Some countries have mandatory voting and they consistently get a participation rate of 95%. Measures need to be taken to incentivize people participating in democracy. And one such way to do this is making voting mandatory. Now, if you remember, guys, again, you can pull in knowledge that you should have about mandatory voting, right? Like Australia, for instance, we talked about this. I gave you an article about mandatory voting. Australia, voting is mandatory, and if people don't do it, they face a small $20 fine, right? If they can't give a valid reason for not voting. So I'm going to add that. Nations such as Australia make voting mandatory, and people who do not face nominal means like low, right? Face nominal fines and also possible jail time. Democracy is worth it. Bah! That's a vibrant democracy, right? And I was just adding that at the end. Democracy is worth it. And honestly, it really is, man. Democracy is awesome. Okay, at this point, guys, look, do I really need to read citizen number 3? Not really. I mean, if I didn't arrive at that person who is that second opinion, right? The opposite to the person who's like, yes, we should, right? And if we haven't found the no, we shouldn't, then yeah, we would have to read citizen number 3. So anyways, let's look at what this guy says anyways. So this guy says, citizen 3, making voting compulsory is ridiculous. Most people who don't vote either don't care about who forms the government, or they know so little about the candidates that the issues that their vote would be completely random. We should require potential voters to pass a voter competency test. Whoo! Wow, so you have to have a certain amount of knowledge to even get to vote. So this guy is a definite no regarding mandatory voting, right? He wants to keep the ill-informed. So hyphenate that. From voting. He believes that only those who are aware of the issues within the nation should have the privilege to vote. Man, this is sounding a tad extreme, right? And I mean, again, yeah, so people who don't vote choose this for various reasons, and we have to respect this. I don't know. Really, that's about it, right? I'm not super worried about this guy. He's kind of crazy. So yeah, competency test, right? People should have to, to pass a competency test to vote And honestly, that's a yikes. I would guess that most people, if this was the case, wouldn't be allowed to vote, right? Because I don't think most people, when it comes to elections, actually are aware of the issue. So, okay, guys, that's the first part that I want you to do when it comes to the actual writing of the assignment number 1, right? And what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to do the intro blurb, and then we're going to do the 2 paragraphs based upon the polar opposites, Citizen 1 and Citizen 2, on the issue of mandatory voting. All right, so that's it for us here, guys. Peace, love you, stay cool, and we'll check you later.